Home is a site where people practice a grammar of belonging and its spatial syntax. This comes out of the work of the geographers Ralph and Staley, 2011 piece on home and migration. And they're building on Bra, who argues the processes and relationships by which we're practicing inclusion and exclusion, belonging, non-belonging, and the ability to home in that sense of homing in Bra's meaning are operating in a variety of practices and objects and in a variety of milieu. I'm going to be taking you into a series of practices around objects and looking at how they make and unmake home and work in practices of homing. So it's home against home, unpacking an ethics of homemaking in the Filipino diaspora. In this diaspora, migrants are expected to send boxes of used goods called Balikbayan boxes back home, in scare quotes because that's what they say, to the Philippines. And this social norm is a form of long-distance household provisioning. Sending boxes places the needs of migrants' Philippine homes in competition with their homemaking practices in the UK, and the contents of these boxes remake Filipino homes as spaces of global care. The boxes have the opposite effect in the UK, however, requiring migrants to neglect their own domestic spaces, their UK futures, and their UK social networks in order to source gifts. So in this paper, I'm going to unpack some of the ethical choices behind the boxes and explore the meanings attached to their contents by donors and recipients. Setting the demands of one home against the other, the Balikbayan boxes express a profound domestic ambivalence, and they materialize migrant resistance to the ideas of permanent settlement while amplifying their practices of sojourning. They're simultaneously reasserting migrants' growing distance from the everyday domestic exchange in their Philippine households. So we see migrants' ethical choices around home being read into the materiality of their boxes, and those choices reveal over time where their home may truly lie. So I've done this as a bit of a visual essay, and I thought I'd start with some homes. This is an artwork called Candy Houses by my friend, collaborator, Kawaii, and it's his commentary on the sort of new architectural forms that have sprung up in the Philippines as a result of migration. So these are the kinds of houses that migrants have brought, remit money to have built for their families back home and for their eventual return. And I'll take you to visit a few. But I'm going to start here on the streets of East London, which is East 17. And this is where another series of practices of homemaking were going on, often in houses that were being informally occupied outside the formal government-approved tenancy agreements. So this is already in a kind of an informal housing market, very overcrowded, not necessarily very good conditions. Many of the houses people were living in here were deceased estates, and rather than being fixed up and formally rented, they were informally given in return for some payment to migrant tenants who would be their caretakers for a year or two while the inheritors settled the estate and got the wherewithal together to actually renovate and sell. So you have migrants living in these houses who know that they're sojourning in the UK and they're sojourning in the house. So they refer to the houses as our house. Back home is always the Philippines, but they use the words loosely and interchangeably. Interestingly, migrants working in the UK were often funding a home building project, a dream house that would be their family home in the Philippines. And they spend a lot of their time in these houses in London thinking about that dream house, furnishing it, collecting things for it, commissioning more, looking at photos, all of these things. So they had a homemaking problem. How they were going to live between our house and back home when they're in this rented house, which is moldy, which is cold, overcrowded, not properly heated, has a kind of plywooded plastic extension on the back with, a second sleeping area. This is what people have called beds and sheds. And in the Philippines, they hope that their money is going into this dream home, their family. Well, in the Philippines, what people hope for is something like this. Lovely, brightly colored, tile-fronted, matching vehicle, secure, spacious, all mod cons. And what they're often doing is finding something that looks like this. So this is where people start building from the basement, and they occupy the basement, and then they rent that out when they put the next floor in, and they rent that out when they put the next floor in. And they're making a little extra money by running a taxi and taking on other jobs in the informal economy. So you have 2 or 3, maybe more related households living in this house, maybe with 3 or 4 workers overseas funding it. And these projects of extending the house, they don't seem to finish. They can go up, 5 or 6 stories and kind of turn into an apartment building, it seems. But they often take decades to complete. And you can see that in the state of the galvanized iron and the concrete on the top story. This one's been abandoned. Well, not abandoned, it hasn't been constructed for a year or 2. So some people do very well and move toward their dream house. Other people have a family home which looks a bit more like a boarding house, and where you have people coming in to stay for a couple of months of education, medical treatment, etc., from more remote communities. The interesting thing about this, for me, was these houses were being built in a peri-urban area, so the land was cheap and you could get a relatively expensive plot of land, but the transport connections were terrible. So these were dream houses, but in the middle of nowhere, and you had to have your own vehicle to get in and out. There weren't buses or jeeps going back and forth. So it was amazing to see these sort of mansions in the wilderness, and wonder if people hoped that the city would eventually sort of move out to that limit and the neighborhoods would gentrify, or what they've been thinking. So the boxes that I'm going to look at are moving from these houses in East London back to those houses in the Philippines. And I want to unpack the ethics in this practice by actually unpacking the box itself. So these are boxes, big cardboard boxes, yay high, yay wide, yay deep. They are used to ship goods to the Philippines by the cubic meter. They're called Balikbayan boxes, and they're recognized by the Philippine legal provisions for customs as duty-free when they contain mostly used goods. And they're usually handled by Filipino-owned freight forwarding companies. So this means they're sort of picked up from a residential address 3 or 4 times a year and shipped off to the Philippines, usually timed to arrive for the commencement of school in June, for Christmas, and for Easter, for Holy Week and the summer vacation. So this cycle means that boxes in various stages of preparation crowd the living spaces of the migrants' houses in East London. You have a house designed, a 3-bedroom house which has 8 people living in it, and they're all packing 3 large boxes. And that packing goes on for 3 months until the boxes are shipped out. It's like dodgem in the living room. There are boxes in various stages of readiness everywhere. The boxes contain goods and gifts for making, sustaining, and remaking relations of home in the Philippines. So really interestingly here, this friend of mine who had 2 boxes, well actually, that friend of mine was boarding in a house, and she had her 2 boxes out in the living room under her landlady's photographs of her family, and a sort of a shrine to people back home. But it was from a related family, the goods that were going there. So packing the box is done by attending what Filipinos in London call car boot, which is a car boot sale. And these are informal weekend markets where people set up tables and sell goods that they've driven in their vehicles. And the car boot sale is both a meeting place and an important leisure activity, as well as giving its name, car boot, to this generic class of items purchased to send home in the Balikbayan boxes. So what people in the Philippines would call wag-wag, used goods, used clothing usually, people in London call car boot because you get it from the car boot sale, and that's really, what it is. So car boot competes with church. And I first found out about the existence of car boot when the choir didn't show up at the church I was doing research in, and I said, hey, where are all those devoted Christians I met singing in the choir last week? And people were saying, car boot, is that the car boot? Yeah, he's got, they're looking at their phone and they're looking at found, and they're really excited about how good some people are at striking bargains. And seriously, the sermon is going blah, 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 and everybody else is going, car boot, leather jackets. And I'm going, okay, I got to get myself to this car boot because it's obviously the alternative church. So I did get to the car boot with two of my friends and learned quite a bit about bargaining and what to do and what not to do and what to buy and what not to buy. It's a Sunday ritual, and it's both social event, friendly competition. It's focused on finding useful bargains. And legally, these boxes should consist of mainly used goods, which are duty exempt. And of course, usually there's a layer of used goods on top and, some other newer, different stuff interspersed, and people turn a blind eye, or they steal it out of the box. So there have been various scandals in the Philippines about how much value has gone missing from these boxes. But generally, people shipping them home figure they need to disguise it as a bunch of old junk before they get to the really expensive perfume down toward the bottom, so it will be safe. And interestingly, there were sort of lessons learned being passed on. When I first went out to the car boot sales, I did it for on and off for a couple of years. People weren't so hesitant about electronics and household appliances that were being sold, but after the 2011 riots, people started clearing electronics, computers, iPads, iPhones out through the car boot sales and selling them to migrants to ship home in these boxes and saying, don't turn it on when it's in the UK. And my friends here actually had somebody they knew who was arrested for handling stolen goods because she bought an iPad at the car boot sale, and when she turned it on and activated it in the UK, the police were able to trace her because it had been reported stolen during the 2011 riots. So this was really interesting to think where this material might be coming from and what people were actually selling and where migrants fit into this particular economy. So houses, not just inside with the boxes, but the laundry areas, the drying areas, and the back garden areas were dominated by the preparation of these car boot items for shipping. And this back garden was one I spent a fair bit of time in, and actually about right here, I didn't take a picture of it at the time, there was actually a brand new garden shed that the household, the migrant household, had built. This is not a house that they own, they're informally renting, but they built a garden shed to store their extra car boot. This was just stuff dying on the line, but when I went into the garden shed, which was dark and not actually lit at that point, you had to go in with a flashlight, what was stored in it were a whole series of leather motorcycle jackets. And I was asking my friend, who was the leather jacket expert who'd acquired them, so who have you bought this one for? And he was saying he didn't know. He was going to ship it home to his family for kind of future distribution. And this is what he said: the leather jacket's so nice, so I want to impress the person, but I don't know him yet. I just don't know who he is, but he's going to be very happy with me that I care so much for him. So he was sort of storing up this value that his family could redistribute, or he could order them to share out to somebody as a way of firming up his plans to return to the Philippines. And I've got to say, for him, that actually turned out to be quite strategic. He went into business with somebody who was the recipient of one of his extra large leather jackets shipped back from London. But he was just compulsively buying motorcycle leathers because he could, and they'd be of value in the Philippines, and they were an investment. So when you're actually packing one of these boxes, there's a box being taped up and there's stuff that's going to go into another box. The first thing that goes in is dry goods. So these are your domestic staples that will see a household through a typhoon, will be a backstop in a time of emergency. You know, they're sitting on the shelf, they won't go off. And this is something from an earlier interview, but I thought this was really interesting. Somebody talking about how her family are controlling their food, not eating as much as they'd like, to minimize the money they spend. So the box sends back storable, rich food, that the kind of thing that people wouldn't buy on an everyday basis that's a bit of a treat, like a big tin of salmon steak or corned beef. You know, they're just getting the local Philippine brands in the market in small quantities, and here they have, you know, corned beef for 10 or 20 that they can do something with if they have to entertain. So it's about that participation in another economy of home. And of course, what it means, you see the state of the kitchen verging into the orange curtain divider there is verging into the living room. What it means is the entire house is almost impossible to prepare food in that kitchen because there's so much box happening. So next in, clothing, toys, linen, personal and decorative items. So items of clothing difficult to find in the Philippines are usually the kind of exotic and personalized gifts, and they're also usually sourced in the car boot sales. So there are different ethnic groups in the Philippines. The people I was working with were from the northern mountains, and they're fairly big-boned and chunky, and so they often found, particularly the taller men, that the usual sizes available in the kind of everyday markets in the Philippines didn't fit them. And so clothes from the UK were a real bonus because they were, you know, large. It also gets cold up there in the winter. It'll dip down to 2 degrees, sometimes even below freezing, and it rains all the time when it's cold. So actually warm, thick jackets, that kind of thing, believe it or not, really helpful. So they were doing a lot of this car boot shopping. But sometimes they were buying stuff like the toys and other bits and pieces that you could get for cheaper in the Philippines, no problem. And I asked people about that, and one of my respondents was pretty adamant. No, it's a gift. You just don't think about it that way. So what if it would be cheaper for someone to go to Shumart, SM, a mall, it's a chain of malls, in Baguio City and buy it for himself? That's not a gift, it's shopping already. And you know, he'll just put the money to something else and no leather jacket. He'll deny himself. So I like to give, to share what I have here. So the feeling is there for him when he's wearing it, that someone abroad cares about him, and that other people can see that, you know? So there's an ethics of homemaking here. There are 2 ethical practices. The first is recognition, and the second is salvage. Be helpful if I spelled recognition properly, sorry about that. And recognition is an interesting one. This is my friend packing her bags, telling me about the contents. I seem to be shooting down my own leg. Those are my purple Converse. I just realized what that is. Okay. She's telling me this t-shirt is for my son and one for my brother-in-law. And behind that, here's a t-shirt. I remembered you. It's from London. It's used, but it's good. There is a limit being placed on what those people can expect from her. They're not getting 200 or 300 pounds to start up a small business or pay tuition fees. They're not getting a flash leather jacket. They are getting a small remembrance, a used t-shirt. It's nice, it's good, they may wear it, but it's not a lot, and it doesn't speak about any ongoing obligation and support. It's just recognition. Okay, so there's an ethic there that she's chosen to send expensive things with ongoing commitments potentially that would turn into allowances to some people, and just remembrances, a kind word, a small gift to others. And then mixed in with this is an ethic of salvage. So the same conversation, she says, and these bed sheets are still very good. Someone can use these, only £2.50. Right? Well, she's not buying the bed sheets because her household in the Philippines has a pressing need for bed sheets. She's not buying them because somebody said, could you pick me up some used bed sheets at the car boot? She's buying them because she can't really get her head around passing them up because they seem to be a bargain. She would have paid so much more than the current value of £2.50 for her if she tried to purchase sheets like that when she was growing up in the 90s in the Philippines. So she's doing this kind of complicated math, but it's about rescuing that stuff and giving it a home in the Philippines. And that's really interesting because, of course, when people open up this box, they're like, used t-shirt, that's not what I wanted. Used bed sheets, oh, what are we going to do with those? I mean, we're not going to put them on the guest bed. You don't really want to sleep in used, that people are not necessarily thrilled about this. But she's trying to manage her relationships with the gifts, but also save the nice housemaking things that she can find that she denied herself earlier in her life. And that's kind of an intriguing practice because she's not buying them to use them in London. She's buying them to send them back to her home in the Philippines. So after people pack their boxes and they have their uplift, where they all go in the truck, there is a bit of an after party. And here's a picture of one of the after parties I attended. It's a Sunday evening kind of cake and beer celebration. And there were some items, like the clocks in the photo, that were reserved for what were very personal shipments to decorate those dream homes. So people would send boxes back, not for distribution, but for themselves. And they would ask their family to store them in a locked room until they got back to either put the things into use or distribute them. So at the end of this party, you got your boxes. They've gone £99 for 3 large boxes, quarterly shipments from this company, and this is this great kind of collective activity. Everybody's compared and shared and talked about cost and who's getting what, and put stuff on Facebook. But the ethos of migrant gifting here places strain on international marriages. British husbands of Filipino women who were involved in this practice were stymied by why we were spending all this money to accumulate all these groceries that were available in the Philippines, effectively for lesser cost. Just wire your mother some money and she can go to a mall and buy it. Take it home on the bus, come on. And the clutter that it generated, and the kind of competition of finding things and saving things, and why this used stuff needs to go. Don't they have t-shirts in the Philippines? Come on. So they found it difficult. And it placed a strain on housemates because some people did more and better car boot stuff or had bigger boxes, more shipments. Other people weren't so good at it or they didn't have the money. And particularly people who had just moved in often found that what they thought they were renting in terms of space was actually occupied by somebody else's car boot or their packing. So I had a really good respondent cancel an interview saying to me, I'm sorry I can't meet you today. We've got moving in and I've got boxes in front of her bedroom door and she won't be able to climb over them. Like, I've got to go and move it. It's out of control. And I'm like, yeah, this is completely plausible. I won't take it personally. She sent me, a chat message saying, ask me your questions by chat. I'm sorry I fixed the boxes mess. But she's like, she's not going to move in. She's gonna leave. There's no space for her. We've used all her bed space for packing. And it also strains transnational family ties because these personal items that are sent home for future use often kind of don't get sequestered long enough or thoroughly enough, or there's an emergency or someone needs something, or it looks politic, or they spur resentments in the people who've been asked to. Don't use that leather jacket yourself. Just lock it in a special cupboard for 2 years until I tell you what to do with it. And, it's like, wait, we're not a storage facility, and you're not paying rent for that. So receiving kin don't necessarily always do what senders want. So the other thing that people said, and this was interesting, that these boxes and the social aspect being so important worked along with the economic to become a barrier to settlement. And one of the senior respondents, who was a parish priest, said What I observe here in the community is that people don't stay in education. They look for their indefinite leave to remain, they get permanent residency, but then they work 60 hours per week because they need the money. But it's only short-term thinking. If they go to college, if they take a course, they could earn another £10,000 a year. If they reclassified their position or applied for a higher grade, they could invest in themselves to improve their chances. That won't happen like this. And he's gesturing to a living room full of boxes. Not just by working extra hours at the same low rate and spending their money on these gifts. So he was saying, a lot of money is going out the door in this practice, and it's not being invested in the migrants' actual settlement and making a life for themselves with success in the UK. It's being invested in bits and pieces of used goods going back to homes in the Philippines. So back home in the Philippines, so the people who had the shed and the leather jackets, I went to their house, actually one of their parents' houses, and I visited their bodega. And the bodega is the storeroom, okay? So what he says is, my family, they received my boxes. Those are the ones he ships to himself. They put it all in a room at the back of our house, but it's overflowing. And everyone who visits can see what I'm sending. My belt sander, my circular saw, all these tools. Those are so expensive at home. So it's good that I've also got something nice to give to others, that I'm sharing my leather jackets, They won't be so jealous. So this is the bodega full of branded shoes and sandals and workbench and hose pipe and other things, and lots of big flannel shirts. That's what was in the bodega when I visited. But that was sort of his personal store at his mom and dad's house. Okay, and this guy is married, mid-30s, 2 kids. Actually has a family home elsewhere, but is storing this stuff with his parents because they have more space and they will manage it for him, where he's not so sure about the sister-in-law who might get at the store somewhere else. So that, where you put your bodega is another political issue. So in this house, you also see the transnational pantry. And I thought this was kind of cute because it's a fridge just outside the bodega. And if you look at the top of the fridge, you notice everything's labeled bilingually French-English. They just had a shipment from the sister in Canada. And the sister in Canada and the brother in London used to coordinate across Skype and talk about the prices of things and time what they were shipping for different seasons of the year, and who had a good deal on spaghetti sauce and who had a good deal on, corned beef and that kind of thing. So this was actually like a coordinated international deal of provisioning their parents' home, which was always kind of sitting around in their living space, not being eaten, not being used, just waiting to be shipped. So what we see here is that boxes are materializing distance, disconnection, and unhoming. So we have impersonal, inappropriate, unwanted, soiled, damaged, ill-fitting, generalized, too cheap, not what was asked for things. Much can go wrong between the car boot, the packing party, and the opening of the box in the Philippines. And the recognition is often insufficient to the recipient's understanding of the esteem in which they should be held, or the respect to which they're entitled. It's often a bit of a slap in the face. The salvage practices, really, they often go unappreciated, with new goods providing more evidence of care and social mobility than old. And here, on the right, I've got the lyrics from Mikey Bustos' parody song, Balikbayan box. And as long as you don't mind a little gratuitous male nudity, it's kind of good. It illustrates the points I'm making, and it went viral across my respondents' Facebook pages in 2012. So let's see if we can. We've got people doing spoof videos of the spoof video. I haven't got anybody singing this version at karaoke because I'm scared. Go away. Okay, I'm scared about the potential of people doing karaoke to this. But this went viral across my Facebook. posted by the guys in the photo of the after party who'd been packing boxes. They thought it was hilarious because it was true. And the kind of the random used content that were what people wanted, and people being so sort of worried about how they were being perceived by those around them, that they didn't bother to look for the value in the gift when they received it, and the givers letting it sort of, take over their life and their space to do something that wasn't necessarily wanted. So instead of going out and interviewing people about, did you like what was in the box, we started from this, and then I asked people about the most sort of random thing they'd ever received. And it was along the lines of used bed sheets with stains and that kind of thing. But it really gave me a good idea about what could be moved through car boot sales in East London and why, and what kind of stuff was hanging around in these homes. Because I would visit some of these homes, and it would just be, wow, you have an amazing China figurine collection. Why have you done here? I'm going to ship it back to the Philippines. It was just all sorts of things that it wouldn't have necessarily struck me would be the value you were looking for. But they said something about the kind of home decor or creating a kind of a leisure space in a Philippine home that sort of spoke to middle class aspiration. And so that's what he's talking about. He'll feel social, like an elite person, just like a foreigner in the Philippines. So distinguishing those Philippine homes that have overseas workers remitting is about a whole slew of material homemaking practices, not just the Nikes and the clothing, but the sheets and the figurines and the kitchenware and whether it's imported corned beef or local corned beef. Like, I can never tell, but Filipinos swear that the imported will be better. Okay, so boxes are actually working against UK homemaking. So these people are finding it difficult to get the wherewithal to give themselves the best chance to settle and to succeed in the UK because of the imperative to ship the boxes and participate in the box packing sociality and to meet those expectations of material goods from the people at home. This is one of the houses I visited, active farming family, as you can see from the hat. And then they had one of the freight companies from London, they have their calendar on the wall. And the woman who was shipping to this household explained to me, and she herself was an irregular migrant at this stage. For me, meaning in my opinion, it's better even not to be permanent here in the UK. Those ones who are, people who are settled in the UK with indefinite leave, they're even more struggling with their life. If you hear that a Filipino is committing abuses against employers and the ones they're caring for, it's usually a permanent resident, isn't it? It's having projects back home, something to go back to, that keeps you from feeling yourself small so you can swallow your feeling. And she means tamp down the feelings of degradation, humiliation, and being stuck that happen around work in the UK, and focus on what you're doing and what you're building in the Philippines, which may be a tile palace in the middle of nowhere with poor road access that's being filled with figures from secondhand stores and car boot sales. So home choices are read into box contents. So this isn't a discussion that people have explicitly, it's a discussion that they have through the exchange of stuff for houses. So this is one sister who I interviewed in Baguio City. It's good for her there, meaning in London. Mana, older sister Kanya. She has her work, her house, her family in London. She's very generous. She supported my kids in their studies, but she doesn't know how hard it is now for us here. I don't open it up to her, meaning discuss it, because she'll think I'm asking again. She doesn't send so much now, not like before, her boxes. When my kids were younger, very good. Now it's just ordinary, small gifts, t-shirts, all from the wag-wag, the second-hand market, meaning car boot. We have it already. We can't really use that for the office or for school, She should be the one to think about it anyway, how it is, the way prices go up, like that, if she really cares for us. But that's okay, her home is there now. She has her kids there, her friends, and they're the ones she must care for. So this sister is saying, it was a Balikbayan box full of used stuff that wasn't really good for us, and you don't really care. You're just going through the motions. Meanwhile, the sister in London is saying, when I retire, I'll go home. I've seen how older people are treated here in the UK. I have friends who've worked in care homes. It's terrible. In the Philippines, we respect our elders. And I've helped out my sister and her family. I sent home boxes. I paid my niece's school. I gave money for their weddings. I fixed up my parents' house, put tenants. My sister gets some money. When I sell, I can buy my retirement home. But my sister Rachel and her family, when I call her, it's as if she's not interested. I used to call her up all the time, send boxes. But now, she says they don't need so much. And she's so busy with many things. I worry the house isn't being fixed anymore, too. Sometimes, as if she's losing interest. So this is about a rupture in this relationship that it's not quite clear to each party what the boxes are doing. The person in London doesn't realize that the contents are now deemed to be inappropriate by the recipients. The person in the Philippines hasn't really communicated what would be of use to them, or that their expectations have changed because it's about gifts. But then it's the obligation on the giver to be sure that it's appropriate for the recipient if it's really a gift. Of course, when you have people separated by long distances who haven't seen each other regularly in many years and may see each other once every 2 or 3 years for 3 or 4 days, it's very difficult to communicate this. So what the contents of the box were saying was what is home? You know, where do I live? How much emphasis am I putting on gifting into this relationship appropriately? It's saying I'm staying in the UK or I'm coming back. But it's never very actually clear if that's the message intended by the donor. So Kanya thinks she's done all the right things and can go home to the Philippines to live out her old age. And Rachel is saying, hey, sorry, you've told us home for you now is London, and you're just being polite and remembering us. So there's a real disconnect there. So unpacking these boxes, we've seen 2 classes of gift. These objects that make home across this translocal social field. These are objects that materialize and delimit specific kinds of relationships and set parameters within those relationships. They create disappointment and refuse obligation. They can also do the obverse, creating appreciation and renewing ties of reciprocal obligation. And then you have objects that are actually appending their global and socially mobile ontology onto the donor in a generalized exchange. So the leather jackets for whoever might need one, kind of in reserve. Those were performing social mobility, discrimination, and a kind of geographical distance and superiority. So this was the guy that was collecting those leather jackets. And I followed him just after he came back to the Philippines. I went on a visit to his parents' hometown with him, and I've got to say, he undid his kind of superiority with the leather jackets by getting stuck into work in a way that I have really very rarely seen. He just worked manual labor, getting ready, building an extension on a house, chopping wood for a wedding, fixing various things for about 3.5 days, from 7 in the morning till 8 or 9 at night, nonstop. And he was amazing, and that was putting in all the labor that he'd missed. But it was really interesting to see which brothers, which friends had ended up with one of these leather jackets out of the bodega, and the ritual of opening the bodega and distributing things. When they had the end of their house extension building work party, that was when he went to the bodega and kind of made his exchanges. So, going into the heart of his parents' home and redistributing this kind of largesse from abroad. So, unpacking boxes shows us how migration is working differentially across space to re-territorialize migrants' home onto a virtual space that exists somewhere between our house in London and back home in the Philippines. People never get back to the same home they've left. It's always something different, but they're never fully at home in our house, and the boxes make sure of it. Back home is that yearned-for place to which migrants' eventual return is inevitably not quite as they imagined it would be. Back home that place cannot fully recognize the sacrifices migrants make to sustain that place. That's why Mikey Bustos doesn't see the money that's lying on the ground, because he's so offended by the stuff. And that means migrants' full return in the emotional sense is rarely possible. That sense of disconnection and distanciation that people have when they finally returned to home. The house isn't what they thought, and the bodega has been depleted, and their relationships are strained. It's a letdown, and I did an interesting interview on it with my respondent who was in the last slide. Our house is a storage depot in London. It's a site of sojourn and transient relationships against which back home is reconstructed as an ideal of permanence and trust and long duration, right? Our house becomes something that's permanently impermanent. And that was one of the really interesting things, was just how often people had to move, to transfer between one house and the next in London, particularly irregular migrants. As soon as somebody living in their house was apprehended by the authorities, everybody else left and went elsewhere. So houses formed and then broke up, and formed and then broke up with great regularity. And those houses were usually referred to not as our home, but by their street names. So there was Liverpool Street and Edinburgh Street and Essex Street and so on, and people would just say Liverpool, Edinburgh, Essex, not meaning the towns in the UK, but the street names, because there would only be one house in that network of migrants on that street. So they would all know sort of who it was. But people would cycle through as they grew close together, took advantage of each other, and then fell out. That happened fairly frequently. And then people would get caught by the authorities and the whole house would break up. So they were quite, we weren't looking at the strength of weak ties with this. We were looking at the fallibility and the impermanence of weak ties. And this virtual home space that people were living in their head and on Facebook was one where making of one home was set against that of the other. And that meant they were deferring their return to the Philippines and the potential of settlement in the UK. So they were living alternately out of a box-strewn house, kind of tiptoeing between the boxes, etc. And the overflowing bodega that they might have a picture of, or that they imagine they have back in the Philippines. So they were betwixt and between in their material goods, but also in terms of security, familiarity, and community. The possibility remains for them, okay? The possibility of mobility tends to remain for them in that imagined back home they can't reach. So the back home that Konyap thinks she's going to retire to isn't there to receive her, okay? The back home that has all these wonderful tools in the bodega, well, some of them have rusted, some of them have been borrowed, some of them got moved somewhere else for storage because someone needed to put something else there. You have your ups and downs with that. It's never quite what was imagined from London. It was good enough for my respondent, but it wasn't perfect. So theorizing home against home. Yes, home is an effective construct. It may not be proximate or quotidian, but it does remain about imagined and long-term security, familiarity, community, and most importantly, that sense of possibility. And these boxes really damp down that sense of possibility in the Filipino diaspora. So I'm using Gaston Haj's work there. And then yes, the sense of home works up and down from the micro level to the geopolitical and back again. So migration regulation and settlement politics affect what is seen, heard, smelled, and touched in the home's intimate space. And yes, Paulo, I agree totally. But migrants use sensory and material encounters to resist homemaking in their country of sojourn and settlement. People have talked about how they use sensory and material encounters to make home. Here I saw people actively resisting it. There's nothing that says, pack up all your decor items in a large box, leave it all over the living room, cover your kitchen table in multiple giant tins of Spam and don't cook, and just kind of wend your way through the boxes. En masse, it's not how people live in the Philippines. It's not what their houses look like there, having been in both spaces. I know that there are houses in the Philippines have spaces for food prep and communal eating and aren't filled with junk. Yeah, they may have a bodega, but it's in one part of the house. It's not spread out through it. And migrants seek to control themselves and their own home-based subjectivities using stuff, and this is, you know, based on Miller's work, but they're working against settlement, again with only partial success because of the way the stuff is received. The stuff that they're curating and sending actually does that work of distancing for them. So Basso and Coleman talk about migration as a material process, but they haven't yet, in that paper, which is very old, worked out the kind of effective dimensions of these material flows in terms of their negative impacts. And migrants are actually denying themselves home comforts to resist homemaking, and the home building process that they're resisting actually comes along with foregoing social, economic, and personal growth. So you would think that the comforts of home in these houses in East London would be what they were seeking to shore themselves up. They're doing that through sociality, but it's focused on home being back in the Philippines. And they're not actually all that comfortable. You know, occasionally they'll have stuff out to display for a couple of weeks, like, you know, a nativity scene and a couple of bottles of holy water that collected, but then it gets packed into the box. And I was really good friends with a couple of my respondents, and we did, you know, birthday gifts and Christmas gifts for a couple of years, and I would ask, oh yeah, what did you do with that handbag I gave you for your birthday? You know, I thought you could use it and ship it home. Oh, you know that phone that had that great picture of me at the dance on it? Do you know where that is? I'd like to get a copy of it when you shipped it home. They're like, wow. So I'm like, you didn't like it? No, I really liked it. That's why I sent it home. Our house is full of boxes. It's in total upheaval. There are people coming through all the time, people getting into fights, people moving out, people coming from other, you know, cities in the UK to stay for a day or two, and I'm not there, I'm out working. They might go through my things and take the phone or take the handbag and stick it in another box and ship it, or just walk out of the house with it. Of course, it's precious to me. It'll be one of my big memories of being in the UK. So I shipped it home. Oh, I was hoping you would use it. Oh, well, I'll use it when I get home. And I love it. Okay, so home is clearly not here. And this was my respondent. This was a gift that I gave her in 2013 after her husband went back. She finally went back to the Philippines in 2018. She left in May. So she gave up her red handbag for 6 whole years. And I haven't, you know, we've had a couple of exchanges. She's just lost her mom, etc. I haven't actually said, so did you ever find that, you know, was the red handbag I gave you in the bodega, or is it part of your home life now? Do you have it displayed? What have you got? And this is something I want to do. We can potentially try to do it by Skype, but it really requires a sort of home visit to see what's there and not there. But that is how I think my respondents are using home against home, and what it actually means in the bottom 3 for theories of home.